And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us?
Welcome to Against the Grain, where curiosity leads the way.
Chrissy, it's so good to see you.
Good to see you too, friend.
It's been a long time. When did we first meet? Was it 2014? I think it's 2014 in my mind.
It must be at least a decade ago, or even a little bit longer. It's been a very long time. I could actually check my Instagram for all the photos I have with us and the experiences in crop circles in London, England. So I should say in England. So it's been a while. And you really started the beginning of my journey in the field.
So that was the beginning of your journey in the field. Okay. I didn't really realize that at the time. I thought because you'd said, when you contacted me, I said, oh, look, you wanted me to, you wanted to hire me, I think for a week, wasn't it? And that week was the week I was with Haim.
Yep. And that's just the synchronicities of meeting Haim. How it started was my father and I would go to the UFO Congress, Alejandro and Karen's conference. And I went there and my dad was talking to Patty Greer, I believe her name was, the crop circle researcher. And she gave my dad a DVD, or my dad bought a DVD. And I said to her, in my mind, I was going to conferences. So my journey started there, but learning and being in the field and working with an expert or watching an expert was the first experience I had with you. And what happened was I asked her, I said, I really want to do this. I said, I want to go and see these crop circles. Who do I talk to? So she gave me a name of a group that does circle chasing and does a whole bunch of tours. So I called them and I said, it's not that I don't want to go see all these amazing ruins or anything like that. I think that's meant to be in history. And I wanted to take that as a separate beat and experience. But I said, all I want to do is circle chasing. I said, that's all I want to do. And I forget who it was, but they said, do you know Gary King? And I said, no. And they're like, contact Gary King. And that's when I contacted you. And at the exact same time, Haim was out there. So it was like this convergence of watching how he worked, how you worked, and then also understanding the field, and then a whole new experience being closest to the phenomenon that I thought that I could possibly get that was on Earth, right? Not seeing a UFO, nothing like that. That to me was like, this is something that is tangible, that I can touch. If it's man-made or it's not, or whatever it may be, I said, this is how I can really relate to the phenomena. And when I was there, I've said to people, because everyone has mixed opinions, which I don't even have to tell you about crop circles. I said to them, I said, if it's man-made or it's not, I said, being there and experience it, they're utterly beautiful. And I said, everyone needs to see them. I said, because the messages and the words and everything that is in a crop circle is just beautiful. And if it is if it is made by humans to some degree, it's some of the best art that's ever been made in the world. And I feel that has so much merit behind it too. So I think when I express it to people like that, they look at it a little bit differently, because it really is something unbelievable. And you are part of that experience as well. So people that get to go with you are very fortunate to do that.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks. I mean, yeah, I think that's why we connected, because you came out looking not just for, you were able to put the whole debate about who's making them and what's going on and looking for answers to one side, which a lot of people are not comfortable with. They want answers. And then so that they can clear their anxiety and move on and get back to the football or whatever it is. But, embracing mystery is something about this whole phenomenon, isn't it? And yeah, so I remember you said you were media savvy, which you were, obviously, being running a PR agency, and you'd met Haim coincidentally at the conference. I think you had a photograph with him, so there was this synchronicity, wasn't there? And then you get to see, I was a correspondent, as you know, for Haim, so I'd do reports, and then he would come over once a year for about a week or 2 weeks, and we would do reports on the crop circle, and you got to be part of that. It was really cool, wasn't it?
It was, and it was full circle where I was at the conference the following year and I was in the videos. You and I were in the videos.
Yeah.
And I laughed because I was like, I don't like what? Like, was so full circle, and nobody would know. I'm like, oh, look, that's me again. It's like in that drone video right there, that crop circle. We're just hanging out there. You know, it's me taking a nap. I remember I took a nap once. I took a little quick nap.
I've still got this great photo of you standing there when Haim was flying the drone, and we're all in a row. Graziella Echeverria was there, and Guillermo and Jaime's crew, and there's a great copy of you, a photograph of us all together, and you're standing there with a Starbucks coffee, and we're standing at the side of a field. Do you remember that photograph?
I do remember that, yeah.
But based on what you were just saying, though, there's this issue with like a whole discussion about who's making them and that thing, and then a lot of people assume that that's what I'm completely into. And as you know, there's this phenomena B, isn't there? There's this, as John Keel put it in the UFO book Trojan Horse, it's more about the people and how they react to the phenomenon than the lights in the sky or whatever it is. But that brings me to this issue, right? You've since then pretty much gone to meteoric sort of, fame in lots of ways, Chrissy, right? You're interviewing Lou Elizondo, you're in the thick of it now with Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal. And you know me, right? I've always kept the UFO thing. I've worked with Haim. I kept the UFO thing to one side because the crop circles are this, as you said, this grounded thing on the floor that you can measure and you can go in and you can have a whole experience with, right? Yeah. And so I want to ask you, since 2017, let's start there, right? New York Times launches the Pentagon papers. Leslie Kean is out there, right? There's this ATIP and these terms come, and then all these names start to come out. There's Harry Reid, and we've got Bob Lazar, and we've got all these characters, Lou Elizondo, and all these. Tell me, how did you get into the thick of it first of all, and give me a brief outline of these characters, these names that we've heard.
Yeah. Oh gosh, so much. It's 2017. A friend of mine, Victor Vigani, who was the right-hand man of Paul Hellard, which is the former Canadian Minister of Defense, that came forward, one of the first political or former political figures that came forward and said, I think this is happening, right? He really cared about the banking industry, which a lot of people don't know about. He wrote a book called Money Mafia, but UFOs was attached to that conversation too. So I met Victor. Actually, how I met Victor, funny enough, was through a guy that formerly worked at NASA and trained. He was my first astronaut. He trained astronauts how to do aerospace walk in the water. And I went on a date with him. And it was the...
Really? You went on a date with an astronaut?
Not an astronaut. He wanted to be an astronaut, but I think he was a Canadian, kind of not prairies, but country bumpkin kid. It's funny enough I'm wearing overalls today. I was supposed to do that. It didn't when I'm telling the story. And so,
Getting character.
So right, exactly. So he lived in Ontario, and I grew up in the country too, but he was this, tall, really good looking man that was extremely smart and bright. And wanted to be an astronaut, but for some reason he didn't pass a certain test, I believe. So he ended up, training now at NASA. So I was like, wow, this is the first person I've ever met at NASA. And this is before 2017. And I'm like, so I must have been, I don't know, in my mid 20s, maybe. Mm-hmm. I don't even know. I could be a little bit older, but I'm like, wow. So I went on a date with this guy and I was just enthralled because this is the first time I've ever met somebody. So we became friends, and he said he really loved the UFO topic too, which I was surprised. Mm-hmm. Right. And that was way before, still a counterculture thing. Right. It was still very kind of, criticized. Yep. So I was like, wow, so we could talk about it. And he said to me, do you know Paul Hellard? And I said, yeah, I know of him. And he's like, do you want to go and meet Paul Hellard with Victor Vigani, who's his right-hand man? He's doing a book signing. And I said, sign me up. So I brought my dad and my mom. I have a photo with Paul Hellard, my dad and my mom. And we all went to this book reading. And I think it was in Guelph at this little bookstore. And my dad and my dad got me into this subject as a little girl. So we had, he had this conversation. And so Victor and I became really good friends. And Victor would say, Chrissy, you're in public relations. Can you contribute meaningfully? And I said, I can't right now, Victor. I'll get blacklisted from media. I can't tell this story, or these stories. I'll be laughed at and I'll never be able to work in this space ever again. Right. So, and which is unfortunate. right? And people understand when you know this topic, you know why, right? It just
Yeah.
everyone would consider it laughable,
Yeah.
and which it's not. And so when 2017 hit, I was on a beach in Mexico, and I remember this as clear as day. And Victor Vigani sent me the New York Times piece and texted it to me, and I was like, he's like, we did it, we broke through to mainstream, and I went, oh my gosh, like I couldn't believe it. I was like, this is insane while I'm reading it, and I'm like, what does this mean? Like, so that was like my time where I was like, I can contribute. This has changed the boundaries, and I can contribute now, both potentially in an investigative side, on a research side, but meaningfully on a PR side of things. I can help be a communicator in this space there, and there's not many of them, especially women. So I said, this is a time that I can help. And so, or do maybe not help, but contribute. And that's how it started. And so I was talking to Victor, jumping on podcasts with him, learning more, trying to find ways to contribute. And then the debrief came around a couple of years later. And I was like, who are these group of men that are like, we're releasing this like video footage, right? Like I've never heard of them. What is this website? So like stalking Chrissy, followed all of them on social media, added everybody I could to like Facebook. And MJ Banias sent out a message and said, we're looking for writers. And I said, I don't write like I do now, but I said at that time I wasn't. I was doing more communications writing, not journalist work. But I was podcasting, and I said, I want to work with you guys. Can I do some video podcasting? And I met with them. And the shorter form of that story is that once we became friends and we were contributing and I was doing work with them on a weekly basis, they said to me, do you want to become a partner? And so, I became as like, the Goonies, one of the first females in that group. And that's what propelled me into the journalistic side of things and more podcasting. So things just happened for reasons. And I met all of those people because of the debrief, also because of myself reaching out to them, being curious, and then going to meet them. Like it was, this as much as anybody else, you have to go.
Yeah.
And for me, it's so important still to meet the people that are in this space, because how you connect with them, what you learn from them is just, and then who they are is just as important as the phenomena.
Absolutely.
In my thoughts.
Yeah. I always said that after 777, when that experience happened to me, I remember saying at the time to my girlfriend, I just want to be the genuine person I am. And people, if they can read you, then they should read that I've got no agenda. I'm just going to say what happened to me and what I've researched over the years, and it's up to them. It's because everyone's going to have different reactions, and that's been my philosophy ever since. Really, just come across and be truthful.
Yeah, and that's what I try to do the most, and sticking up for people and ethics, and having a level of where. Not saying I don't think everybody does this, but some people I feel might not. I need to have a layer of, and maybe I hold myself in high regard of my ethics. Maybe that is the problem, but I find that you have to have a level of it, of being like, what is the truth? What is not the truth? What is friendships and relationships in contrast to this as well? And, are people doing this for a reason because they care, or because they care about being famous, or they care about other things? I think, what is the motivation and why you're doing it? And there's tons of reasons. I don't think there's anything wrong with people being notable for their own space and making money when they're doing things to the best ability they possibly can, and they really have a true intentions behind it. And I think that's what really matters, because you see that in not even just the UFO topic, you see it in so many different industries that's not the case. And the smoke and mirrors. I've pulled back a couple curtains in the past couple of years where I've said, that's not what it is, and I don't want to be part of that. And I've left projects because I felt that the quality of journalism wasn't there. It was more about, I'll just believe everything rather than vetting it. So I think that there is a lot of that. And again, not like I'm the most amazing journalist in the world, but I try to do my best, and that isn't very important to me. I don't want to create smoke and mirrors.
Part of that is getting fooled for a while, isn't it? You because I mean, the whole subject that we're in, public relations, right? propaganda. As you know, propaganda, public relations come out of propaganda. Psyops that governments use, right, to deceive people. Psyops that corporations do to manufacture consent. Most people who are aware know that these things go on. No one more than yourself, right? You've studied the subject. We are in a field which most people know, who've been in the field for a long time, has been subject to all of that for 60 or 70 years, where the government may have said this, or they may have covered up this, and they may have said this to mislead people. And we're in with the sharks in that way, aren't we, with this whole field? And then you have to trust, and you have to see where somebody's coming across it ethical. And then, as you say, you find some smoke and mirrors, and you learn from it. Mm-hmm. Give me an example of the smoke and mirrors that you found along the way.
Oh, I don't want to say something.
Sure.
There has been broad outline. I have been privy to stories that I feel were not vetted properly. And this is not from the debrief. This is from other experiences. And realizing I'm like, that's a lie. Like, you've lied to me a couple of times, and I've caught you in lies. And now you want me to try and believe that you've had these types of experiences. And this is former people that have worked in government in the United States. These are not anyone I've interviewed. I'll just say that. Sure. So anyone, these are not a Lou Elizondo. This is not a Christopher Mellon. Yeah. Because I've been unfortunately, this is the other part, been told that, the gossip mill where I was doing hit pieces on these people, which I wasn't. That's not my style in that way. No. If I found something, I would report it as investigative journalism, but that's not my style. And also, you have to give them the benefit of the doubt to at least make a comment on those pieces before I'd even do anything, right? That's what you do. So with that said, again, it's none of those people, but it's been people that are not in the public sphere right now, where you're like, that's not true. You're lying to me. And why are you lying to me? And what's your motivation for that? And it's extremely disheartening. It's not good for your mental health to go through things like that too, where anyone's lying to you on a very big scale, which could mean anything about someone's life or their experiences, what happens to humanity. Like, it's not just a white lie. It's much more than that. So I've had those experiences, and then just how I've had experiences where people are telling stories and they're not ethically really vetting them properly. I've been through that as well, where you're looking, and I think I did mention that, but I've been that in 2 cases. Right. And it's sad because they want to use it as entertainment rather than using it as proper journalistic work. And they want to be known as a journalist or in that form to protect themselves, but they might be known as they should be known as something else from storytelling. Journalists tell stories, but we try to tell stories that are the most accurate and responsible way of reporting as possible. Absolutely. And I don't think we have that a lot in this topic. I think we'll get better at it, but I don't think we have, and we have lots of people that do and tell them really well. Ralph Blumenthal does, Leslie Kean, they do their best they possibly can to vet. Gosh, they've been around there way longer than I have, so I have so much respect for both of them and them doing their best work. But then we also have the other side that doesn't really care. They just want the notoriety. And that really hurts my heart. Yeah.
I'm with you on that. Also, we've got, that's the thing that sort of counters or tempers the whole conspiracy theory thing, doesn't it? We've got human traits where people are blinded by their own ambition and prepared to compromise their morals and ethics to get a story or to get in front of somebody and stuff like that. This is what humans do when they're trying to climb the ladder, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And we see it, and I understand that lying is different than over, what's it called? Exaggerating,
hyperbole.
Right? Yeah. Hyperbole. Yeah. It's different. There's tons of people. We all exaggerate to some degree, sure. But I think when it comes to issues that are really important and we're trying to mislead or disinform people, that's the part is hard. And maybe someone said, like, if I'm not, I have a hard time with that. And that's part of my learning and growing and understanding what that means inside to me, because it does affect me a lot. And I think it should affect people. I really do. Any form of lying or shame or guilt they're horrible emotions, and they're things that people don't need to feel when it is used for manipulation. Right. And so I feel that does happen a lot in this space.
It does. I think it happens in a lot of spaces.
It's true in all of life. So Yeah, and that's not been all, like, I speak of some negative stuff, but I've had wonderful experiences too in this business. I've had, met tons of great people like yourself. I've had so many wonderful connections, have sat at tables where I've been like, what is going on here? Like, these people are like, this is amazing. Like, who in the world would have like anthropologists and a former CNN guy and like, and then like a podcaster and then, like all at the same table. And I'm like, all talking about UFOs and having a blast, former government, people in the Pentagon. You're like, and everybody's getting along of race, creed, color, like, gender. Like it's so amazing to see that. And that's one of the things I love being part of, is just to listen and learn. Cause like I've sat at tables where for sure I'm probably one of the dumbest, and I'm okay with that in specific topics with science. You're going to sit at a table with that, like, or be in a room with Avi Loeb and being like, I know more. It's like, I'm going to shut up and listen for a while and ask some questions. Yeah.
I totally get you. I totally get you. Oh, there's so many things flood into my mind as you're saying these things. It's like those times when you pinch yourself and you think, how did I get here amongst these people? But what came to my mind just a moment ago, I watched Graham Hancock mediate the archaeologist, what's his name, Finkel or something like that. He's a sort of Barney Rubble looking guy with a hat, who's an archaeologist, who came out against Graham Hancock after that Netflix show Ancient Apocalypse or whatever.
Yes.
And he mediated a 4-hour, 20-minute, I think it's only been released a day or something. I watched it today. He mediated this 4-hour discussion between these two opposing views of our history, right? Whether or not there was an ancient civilization that built the pyramids, or whether or not this is just, hunter-gatherers that were clever.
Right.
And at the end of it, Joe Rogan made this great, there were some contentious times. There were some times when I think Joe Rogan was going, okay, I think we need to take a break, because they started to, get heated. But on the whole, it was very positive, because this is what we're supposed to do as human beings, isn't it? We're supposed to get together so that we can thrash out these things in the name of finding the truth, not whose agenda or bias wants to win. And so we're in an arena with the UFOs and the crop circles and other mysterious things like ancient monuments, where we have people who want to pursue their own careers or get notoriety that, maybe represent things on that basis. There's people who are outright lying, who've got an agenda. And then there's people like us who are in the middle of it going, we just want to know what's happening and get to the bottom of stuff, and how do we best go about that? And forging good relationships, like you just said, when you're sitting at a table with lots of people from different colours and creed getting on, and now thinking it's okay to talk about this stuff. Like Gary Nolan, I think you interviewed Gary Nolan, didn't you?
Yeah, love Gary.
His Tucker Carlson interview. I mean, I when I go back to, okay, let's we got David Grush to cover, and we got the recent revelations in Congress that have sort of said, oh, well, there's nothing really to see here, which has sort of turned things around on its head again, isn't it? That's got Ross Coulthard saying, what's going on, and Sheehan saying there's all these sorts of misrepresentations going on. So let's go to David Grush. This story of this whistleblower was actually released through your show, right? With Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal.
Yeah, I should explain in that. I asked Danny Sheehan that question, and Danny said the names, and not intentionally. I think it was in passing, and that ended up started a catalyst. But there was lots of other people within. I was the first, I think, podcast that might have mentioned it. There might have been another I heard too at one point. I don't know if it was before or after. But I think mine was one of the catalysts to be like, let's just get the story out, because lots of people are starting to hear this in the tricklings in the UFO community. So it was leaked on my show, but not intentionally by either me or Danny. Danny and I have talked about that. I've talked about it with Leslie. I've talked about it with Ralph. These were not, they're not intentional gotchas. They're just things that happen through passing of conversation.
Sorry, I'm confused about what you're talking about now. Maybe I'm at a misprint.
Oh,
so tell me what you mean, Daniel Sheehan.
Yeah, sorry, my fault. Maybe.
Yeah.
So Danny Sheehan, before the David Grush piece was released with the debrief, Danny Sheehan was on my podcast about, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks earlier before the show,
okay.
and mentioned David Grush's name, said, but I think said Grush, didn't say his first name, and said, I think listed 2 whistleblower names from what I know, but I know for sure it was David Grush. But he mentioned the name, and that really started the catalyst of releasing. So what were you thinking of?
Oh,
Maybe
no. So I didn't know that you'd done Danny Sheehan before the Ralph Blumenthal and Leslie Kean interview. The first I became aware of the Grush revelations was then when I subsequently heard that they'd come to you to release that story. And so I watched that podcast whenever it was released a year or so ago.
Right. So what happened was the WAPO, Washington Post, decided not to take it. And then Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal were like, this story needs to get out because Ross is going to break it as well. Right. And so Ross was breaking it. And so News Nation was breaking it, and they wanted Washington Post. But Washington Post took too long to vet. They said no to it. There was all these other, stipulations. So Leslie went to the debrief, and Micah Hanks and Tim McMillan. Tim McMillan did a fabulous job vetting. I will say one thing. We are a small media outlet, but we've done amazing stories. We've done multiple stories that have broke all different news in all different areas, but we know how to vet content.
Right.
We have the ability to vet just as good as the Washington Post, and people might be shocked by that, but it's true. And Tim McMillan did a great job. That's why we did a piece additional to how this content was vetted, because we knew that people would be like, who's a small outlet think they are? They can't do that. They don't have the abilities. It's like, well, you'd be surprised what a small group of people can do when they really care and have resources and have worked hard on this subject.
And so you're talking about vetting Grush, or you're talking about you didn't need to vet Kean and Blumenthal, just the story?
Yeah, just the story. So the story was taken to the debrief, and then we had to vet the sources, the people that were on background.
Mm-hmm.
And so Tim McMillan did that with Micah Hanks, and Christopher Plain wrote the piece how Tim did it. But we had to vet who the sources were that were coming out forward, and then who was on background. And even on background, you still have to vet who they are to make sure that they're who are they saying they are, right? Sure. You need at least 3 sources, and good 3 confirmed sources to tell a story to back it up. And so we had more than that, but there were some people on the record and some people were off the record. But the guys did a fabulous job. Now we're seeing all of that because that story went live. We're learning so much more, and it doesn't mean that the debrief feels that David Grush is telling the truth. We were just reporting the facts, and they were reporting the facts and what was told by the people from the intelligence community, which holds a lot of weight. So that's what we were doing. But we will always report when we find out if David Grush is right or not, or whatever it may be. We'll always just consistently report the stories and the facts and the news. That's our job, is to not have a bias, but to tell the news.
Sure. But along the way, you form your own kind of bias, right? You form your own kind of feel for what you think's going on here, or what you think might be going on, or what you don't know, right?
Exactly. Yeah. You have an idea of what you feel, because you're learning information as you go along, right? So for sure you're creating your own bias, but you can't put it into the pieces, sure. Right? But I for sure will talk about it with people. I'm open to that. I think it's important that we have open conversations. I don't know who's telling the truth. I don't. And I never, and I can't say I do. And I can't say I know exactly what's going on, because none of us do. Exactly. But I also don't know exactly who's telling the truth. Right. And
it's a strange story, the whole thing, isn't it? I mean, so when I watched it, the first 15 minutes of it, I had to stop. I'm talking about your podcast with Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal now. I had to stop, rewind it, and watch it again. And then I made notes. This was a year ago, right? Now, I don't do this very often. But I did on this occasion, because there were some things which struck me, that stuck out to me. And I'm thinking, is this me? Or let me watch it again, right? And so, okay, in your introduction, you say, there's this big story, and you've got highly classified information that David Grush is going to release, and so on and so forth. Then it goes to, I'm paraphrasing here, I have got notes where I've got the sort of time codes and stuff. Leslie Kean says, you ask her some questions and then saying about the dangers for David Grush, and she says, well, that's one of the reasons we got the story out, right? So that kind of fills in a bit of a blank now with the Daniel Sheehan thing that you referred to earlier, because that must have pushed things along, I'm assuming. So they said, right, in order to protect this source, we need to get it out there so that he's protected. So that's number one. Okay, most good journalists know that that's the way that... So then we go down this road where we're thinking, right, you know, he's telling us this stuff, right? This is amazing stuff, that there's this government program and that there's, you know, biologics and these kinds of things, right? And then when I hear Ralph Blumenthal say, yeah, but there's nothing he said that wasn't given the okay by the Pentagon. They didn't say they agreed with it, right? But they said you can say it. That's when my head started to twist. What's your take on that?
It's a great question. I did the same thing. That's why I asked that, because I know that with specific books like the Skinwalker books, I believe both of them had to be vetted through the Pentagon so that information could be released. So I knew that. And then when I read the story that we obviously, that Leslie and Ralph wrote, that was a part of it, right? Of how they would go about vetting this and how the Pentagon said yes to that. So I did the same thing. I said, it's a mind flip for sure. But I think that, you know, from what I've learned so far, for sure, and what I've heard consistently through former government researchers, civilians that have been attached to this to some degree, the phenomena, but specifically former government, and ones that are contractors too now, I would say, that everyone has always said to me that there are people in the government that want this and people that don't.
Right.
So I really feel that the Pentagon only knows so much. And again, it's the classification, right? You have so many classifications of information that, you know, for example, Sean Kirkpatrick saying that he had the highest class, or some of the highest classifications. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but that is a big part of it. So I feel that...
Just let me get the names right. Was he the predecessor to Lou Elizondo?
Yeah, he ran Arrow and now has formally stepped down. So with that and learning that there's this hierarchy of, obviously we know of what you can be read into and what access you'll have. But I think that is part of it, right? And I think that the Pentagon knows that. I think that there's people that some information they'll let go and some they won't. They do kind of have to, I believe, because of the Freedom of the Information Act as well. Some of this could get out through FOIA. So who knows the pieces that they said no to, because that is possible, right? I'd be curious to know that, if there's been that, and then why they said yes. That is a direct question to Susan Goff, who is the head of the communications and the PR for it. But in my perspective as a communications person, again, I've never worked attached to the Pentagon, so I'm not sure, just attached to other campaigns in the consumer and business and science spaces. But I would think that because of FOIA, some of that stuff will come out. Who's telling the story, how they're telling the story. And I think that some of that information they want out, right? I don't know why and what the purpose is, but I think they do want it out. And it could be to find truth, but it also could help with collusion. So, and that's the problem with this topic that I feel that, is we don't know what to believe and what to trust, was specifically in the UFO conversation, because sometimes it can be used against us and sometimes it can be used to tell the truth. And that's what makes it so disinformation campaigns so effective and muddle, so that at some point you're like, and this is why the average person probably does do this. This is too much. I can't think about this. Exactly. This is too hard. This is, I don't have the time. I don't want to know this. This hurts too much. And I can't believe those things, or I don't want to believe those things. So I feel that is, so I don't know why they've let it, but it's part of the mechanism. And I think they have to, with my ramble right now, because of parts of the Freedom of Information Act. I mean,
it's a strange, the things that, there's that journalist from the New York Post, isn't there, that did that whole thing. I can't remember his name. He's got the basement vault or some basement office show. What's his name? Yeah,
I just had a brain fart too now.
I can't remember his name. But he really went for it, didn't he? I mean, but some of the points he made about this book about Skinwalker that you mentioned there, that's got some strange stuff in it. But he makes all these accusations about the money being funded to that, and it's going to Skinwalker, and that stuff stacks up though, right? That's true, where that money went, that 22 million.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah. Did it? And there's some semantics around if it went to OSAP to ATIP and what was the program name. I believe that OSAP or ATIP, I think it was ATIP, was not considered an actual official name of the program. It was actually a nickname from another official program. So from what I've been told, and Micah Hanks and Tim McMillan have talked about this, specifically Micah Hanks from the debrief has talked about this with me because he's followed that bouncy ball so well. Where and I appreciate that because it was a hard one. I've had to call him sometimes and be like,
hang on a minute,
can we clarify that? Like, I just want to make sure I'm saying this accurately if we're doing an interview or whatever it may be, right? But from what we know, so that's probably why Susan Goff didn't directly mention that, because it wasn't an official program name, so she didn't have to. It was a nickname, and then now has moved on to subsequent programs, right? So there's so much semantics around it. I have been in Utah and I've been out in Skinwalker Ranch, and at one time we'll go to Skinwalker. I know a plethora of people who have been on that ranch and nothing has happened to them since they've come back. Doesn't mean that it didn't. I'm not going to negate that. Doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. You know, with my luck, I'll walk away with a Skinwalker, next to the first time I ever really get to go. But I've been adjacent to it. I will say that the land feels very, there is a very eerie feeling to it compared to parts of Vernal, which is by Blind Frog Ranch, which has similar phenomena allegedly and been on that land and been all over that land, to adjacent to Skinwalker, which is just the landscape is very flat, barren. You can feel this eeriness towards it or on it. But yeah, I know lots of people that have been there and nothing has happened to them, but it doesn't mean that it hasn't. I just feel that who knows, people could be exaggerating to some degree too in that book.
Well, he makes the accusation, doesn't he? He makes the accusation that, they had this money, and what was it? Some of the scientists that were there, they said, I think one of them whistle blew afterwards and said, we were just basically saying, we saw this last night, we saw that because that's what they wanted to hear, and stuff like that was going on. Yeah, where do we go with that? But I felt it was strange that the money got appropriated. It's not a lot of money, 22 million, really, is it, in the bigger scheme of things for something like this?
No, that's probably like the same amount you fly up a jet is like $1 million. You get like, I think like to even get up on a jet is like $1 million at least for a round.
Yeah. So
it's like 20 jet runs.
Right.
So it's not, I don't think.
No. So for a big subject like that, you've got this amount of money, but then, so we got Grush coming out, and we obviously the spectrum of accusations. On one end, you've got, okay, this is a long game, right? Some people, they're throwing this out there. It's got plausible deniability. That makes sense, right? Because they've let him come and say this, but they're not backing it. And then Susan Goff says this, and we don't know about this, and so on. Right. And so later on down the road, and then we get to this recent hearing where what's the guy's name who stood up in Congress? I get confused with all the names.
There's David Grush, and then there's Ryan.
The one who gave,
Graves.
Yeah, Graves. That's it. So he basically, there's nothing to see here. That sort of shocked Coulthard, and then he did his immediate sort of interview with Daniel Sheehan afterwards, and Sheehan said, "Hang on a minute, these guys are lying completely." Because, so that sort of gives that the people who thought it was a conspiracy, a sort of NSA Secret Service kind of disinformation campaign from the beginning, they feel like they can puff their chests up now because they're going, see, look, they're coming back now and saying there's nothing to see here after making all these revelations and keeping us strung along for the last 6 years. I like Eric Weinstein's, when he was on Joe Rogan, he said, I keep getting all these people coming to me and saying, you want to see what we've seen, and we haven't really seen anything after all these years.
Exactly.
And he calls it UFO edging. You keep getting right to the point where you think you're going to see something and then it goes away.
Well, and that's the problem right now that's happening. There's been so many promises that have been delivered by so many people and or said that they will be delivered and they haven't yet. So that for sure is a problem on its own, but that's giving hope to people when hope might not be there. I don't personally, I believe obviously hope's a great thing, but I don't feel that misleading people in that way. A lot of people drop those bombs like, I know this information. I try not to do that for the fact that I don't know, and I don't know if someone's lying to me all the time. So if I feel 100% and I've got the receipts or anything else, and I feel that with other people's work, if they've got the receipts or they're reporting or a journalist, I usually follow that work. Everyone has different ways of going about it. I understand that, in different styles. and I can respect that. Some styles I wouldn't take myself. I wouldn't do that, but to each their own. I think within this topic, once you get in, you go through this like ebbs and flows of like what you think is happening. And I've gone through so many of them. Like I literally went into the UFO topic when I was a little girl being like, it's definitely aliens. It's definitely aliens. And like, cause that's what pop culture tells us and everything else. And then as I get older and older, and my dad is a big influence of that too, right? Him reading all these different books and talking to me about it and his opinions. And for sure that influenced me. How could it not? So then I get into this topic and I start, outside of going to conferences and meeting you initially, and then now talking to all these other people. And I'm like, especially like working with Jacques Vallée, like, whew, like I've had, love him, like such a good man, and like gentle giant.
He's a giant. That's the word, isn't it?
He is. And all of the forms. He's like, I call him a gentle giant, and I have so much respect for Vallée, and I feel so fortunate to be able to talk with him or even get to ask him questions of what he thinks. Because he's taught me a lot, even just reading books of his and talking to him. Talking to him has changed my perspective too.
In what way? In what way? Give me an example.
For sure, like aliens to now, for sure, I would say that I believe more in a Vallée theory, right? Like interdimensional. We have no full proof of that. We look at CERN and we look at other things that are happening within the science communities that are proving of some type of potential dimensions, right? Or looking to, and what does that mean now and in the future? But with Vallée, I just feel that I respect his work. I respect him as a person immensely. I've spent time with him. I've talked to him. I've seen his heart. He has so much history, so much knowledge as a venture capitalist, as a computer programmer, as a computer engineer and a computer scientist, and a researcher, and someone who's built databases for the government and has worked with the government and knows so much information. So for me, but I don't see Vallée being like, I just want to make all this money off it. I make money in my venture capitalism, and I respect that so much for him. And you can make money in this space. I don't think there's anything wrong with it when I think you're doing it to the best abilities you possibly can. And
it's that's the key, isn't it? The integrity.
Integrity, exactly. And so Vallée I've seen, and I feel that that's been that shift. And then also outside of, government, it's not that I don't listen to government. We know that government can lie and persuade. I listen to more to the people. And if people are telling me their stories, and first account is evidence. It really is. It might not be the be all and end all, but for sure it's evidence. It might not be proof, but it's evidence. So hearing stories that you feel and spending time, for example, with Randall Nickerson and his experience, he directed Aerial Phenomena. I've talked to Randall length on end as a friend, and I'm like, I believe you. Like, there's so many different
from the heart. Are you talking about from the heart? Right.
From the heart. Yeah. And experiences, and like hearing them and hearing that, sometimes outside of government, I'll listen to it, but there's so much collusion in that. I feel that when people are having the human experience to this, there's a lot of people that lie in that too. But I think when someone is not taught to lie within the government or knows counterintelligence, it's easier to spot a lie, I feel, or, try to. So I feel that is a big part of it. And so I like to hear their experiences. I care about it. And to me, I find them fascinating. Like, well, they really are.
I was going to say, I don't want to forget this. I want to come back to Gary Nolan and the CIA stuff, right? But before I do, because of what you just said, you interviewed another hero of mine, a big hero, and I'd love for you to give him my name, see if I can get him on my show at some point. Jeffrey Kripal.
Oh yeah, for sure. So smart.
So smart. And he says in the interview that you did with him, it's about the experiences. And it comes back to this, doesn't it? And this is going now into phenomena B, right? It's going into what effect it has on the people. That's some more telling about this kind of mysterious phenomenon, which then makes you move away from, it all must be aliens, to maybe there's something else, like Kripal says. And that's why I'm with Kripal, because this thing that presents itself in a way that we could probably culturally accept it, and it's changed over time, but is this generic thing.
Yeah,
I like
it's true.
that.
I like it too. And I don't think we know. I think when we get closer to finding out, it might be something that we've never ever thought of before. More likely, we only know what we know. And so we always project our experiences onto other things to name it or to understand it. So I don't think science is at the point yet where we can understand it fully. We're at the infancy of that. I think we're on the brink of getting closer to it. I really do feel that. But yeah,
But it's like what you says with you is that so we've been so heavily reliant on materialistic, empirical, objective analysis to give us the truth, right? And we've ignored the subjective, we've ignored the anecdotal, we've ignored the criteria by which you're judging truth, which is it rings true, it feels right, this person's, it stacks up. There's this element that we must consider as human beings as well, and that's the subjective. My teacher once told me that, I asked him where the truth lies, right? A bit deep and philosophical. And I said, is it because we project so much out, our own biases onto the world, that then look for these things to fit in. And then there's the world coming back at us with data that we've got to kind of figure out. And he said the truth lies at the point where the two meet.
That's interesting. Yeah.
And I don't really fully understand it. It's sort of, when you hear that, you go, oh, that's interesting, like you just said, right? But how do you get to that? And I think that the work that Crypo's doing and people like that, where they're saying, look, we can't dismiss the subjective. We've got to bring this in.
I think what Kripal's doing is finally humanities. So anthropology is really taking hold of this. And Gary Nolan becomes part of this. Peter Skafish becomes part of this. And Stanford becomes part of this. Rice University with Kripal is part of this. But they're all looking at it from an anthropology perspective, from a cultural perspective. And I think that's where that meets.
Yes.
I think that's where that moment is, where science and anthropology and policy, like they do at the Soul Foundation and the conference that they host, that's that little point. Because I do feel that you're right. We all have our own projections of what's happening because of our own experiences and what we feel. And that is truthful too. That is truth, right? Your experience can never be negated if it is how you've experienced in the world and perceived it. That is your personal truth, right? And so I have issue when people say that's like, well, that's not correct. That's not how you see it. I'm like, well, that's how you didn't see it through your lens, right? And so that's why it's so important to have empathy and understanding of people's experiences and how they're viewed in the world or presented in the world and how they see the world. Because that, I think, that's the middle. Those are those intersections of the middle. And it's such a human experience that we have to, well, first I should back up. If we can't understand how to communicate with each other and how to relate to each other, we will never be able to figure out this phenomenon. Probably.
We're doomed.
Because we can't see ourselves in others, or we can't feel that, being self-representative is like, this is my experience, and people negate experiences. How many people go through things and they say, well, that didn't happen, or this didn't happen, especially in the UFO world. So we have to believe people. And we have to then understand how to analyze it. We're getting better at collecting data. So that's extremely important. And I think that civilians are doing it. The government's doing it. So that's a great step forward. But we need to start believing people and start having ways that we can communicate this together and come to a point. Because I think that's how we maybe potentially have a better understanding of what's happening. We just can't understand ourselves. How are we going to understand a phenomenon?
Well, when you're talking about a convergence, aren't you? Things are coming together, and we can't see the bigger picture, but it's like we feel we're a part of something that is converging, and there's pieces we can't see yet, but they're coming. And I did a podcast with Scott Onstott, the architect Scott Onstott, who's done Secrets.
Oh no!
Oh yeah, no. He's a great guy, honestly. You go, and we were talking about information coming together, things coming out, and we were talking about interdimensional beings and the muse and stuff like this, where you get inspiration and ideas from, and this other, right? And I brought up the psychedelic plants. Oh. And so there have been some recent studies. So I read a book, I it must have been 10 or 15 years ago, called Inner Paths to Outer Space. Okay, and it was some psychiatrists who were doing work down in Mexico with DMT, where they were, giving people DMT under controlled circumstances. They were laying on the floor, and afterwards they come out and say they had a full-blown abduction experience. And so there was this connection, or they were drawing this connection between something in consciousness and something which gives people these experiences which are as real, okay, but not completely physical in the sense that they didn't get beamed up. They were in this room and people witnessed that, right? So that was 10 or 15 years ago. Well, recently, the thing with DMT is that it's very short. It's like it's literally like I did some before. I did an ayahuasca ceremony with a shaman before I came back from Mexico. And
my podcast, sorry, just to pause quickly. My podcast is going live right now. So when you're done this thought, I have to tweet and then we can go back on.
Sure.
I'm not doing the show. It's just pre-recorded.
Oh, sure. This is pre-recorded, so I can edit that out. That's fine. Okay. Where was I? This thing. Oh yeah. So if you smoke DMT, it's kind of like Star Trek. You know when the stars go like that, when it goes to warp drive and shoots off. It's kind of like that, and you have this experience, but you're back really quickly. And so Terence McKenna, the great philosopher, used to talk about, the machine elves and seeing this realm that were there, these other beings that were in a kind of dream dimension, right?
Right.
So recently, they've been able to put people under intravenously, where they've stayed under for quite a while. And you've got...
I've read this.
Have you read this? Yeah. And so you've got people in
Yes.
different places that are coming back and reporting going to the same place. And they've not spoken to each other. So... this converges, I think, in some of the ways that we're looking at what it is potentially we could be dealing with these types of phenomenon. And that stuff's really interesting to me. The fact that we don't have the answers is interesting to me, and that it's still a mystery. But the fact that we can get this feel that, there's tantalizing little things out there that are coming together.
Yeah. I find DMT so interesting. Also, I think that there is some cross connection there. I don't know exactly what it is yet. It's not my area of expertise, but I haven't done it yet, but I've been extremely curious about it. Along with ayahuasca, I know when we first met, our conversation about psilocybin was way before psilocybin even being a thing now. Like you would say to me, the Mycelium Network, you talked about it. Like, Gary, you were so far advanced in that conversation. And I remember being like, because I didn't know a lot. I've never, at that point, I've done psilocybin now. Like, I can say that. I think it's okay to say that. And I, at that point, I never tried it in my life. So I was like, I was learning and obviously open-minded towards it. And then years later, like, all of this information comes out. And I was like, Gary knew, and he knows. And I thought that is so wonderful. And then when I started going down the avenues of like psilocybin and then DMT and learning more about it, it's just fascinating. And what we don't know about consciousness is like, there's so many podcasts, there's so many people that talk about it. I will never probably dabble in that area, but I'll always learn. Like, I won't speak on it, but I'll learn about it and maybe I'm some point connected to the UAP, be able to speak on it and that. But I love it. And I think that we are again at the genesis and the beginning of understanding what that means to us. And what does the plant mean, connection to us, and what does it mean to be human?
These are all big questions. So I want to just go on to Gary Nolan. Amidst all of these stories with David Grush and we don't know what's happening, you've got Gary Nolan at Stanford who gets approached by the CIA, and they say to him, "We need you to examine some people." And these people they've had close encounters, and some of them were at the UK base, right? The Bentwells, and he lays out to Tucker Carlson, these people have been affected. And then when I watched your podcast with him recently, he talked about this basal ganglia, this thing that we're finding is different in people like us, that have these differences in their brain structure, and he found that when you look at people who are coming together and sometimes having relationships and having children, that they're sort of finding their way together. What do you make of all
My
that?
parents.
Your parents?
My parents are those people. I've had this conversation, and I say this proudly, and I think all of us should go through, therapy in different ways. And when I looked for a therapist recently, just to have conversations with about even just personal things that are going on in my life, I asked her to focus. She focuses on neurodivergent. So I am neurodivergent. I'm dyslexic. I'm a high functioning dyslexic, right? There's all different forms of it, but I did speak to Gary about that, about neurodivergence attached to potentially the basal ganglia or, my gosh, the caudate putamen being enlarged. And so there's not direct correlations between neurodivergence, but we see similarities with a lot of people that are neurodivergent having these experiences. I don't think that you have to be neurodivergent to be able to see that, right? I just think that there probably are reasons why neurodivergent people see things. Like, for example, being dyslexic, I call it my superpower because, and this is maybe not in all cases, but I feel that it is true that we can see things from a bird's eye view. We see things holistically and we see them from a larger perspective, and I can zoom in and out. And the way that I work in this world is through a neurodivergent lens. So, being called weird or things like that, I laugh because that's neurotypical saying that because they don't see it the way that I see things. So the way that I play in the world and the way that my, they say that neurodivergent people with dyslexic have high forms of empathy, right, and sensitivity. And so I see that. But the reason why I do say that is that my entire family is neurodivergent. My sister is, my dad is, and my mom is. I think I've been diagnosed as dyslexic as a kid, as a high functioning dyslexic. My sister has not, and my parents have, but they suffer the same. I shouldn't say suffer. How they navigate in the world is very similar to me. But when my parents came together, the reason why I think that they're still together and the reason why their relationship has worked out since they've known each other since they've been little kids. And I say this, I don't have proof on it, but through experience, both of them are dyslexic and both of them are neurodivergent, and that's how they see the world through their lens. So that's what I think brought them together outside of factors of the, coincidences and things like that. I think that how they view the world and how they navigate it and how they found a partner and understanding in each other is through those differences. My dad had a UFO experience. So for sure, if I probably put him under one of those MRIs, he probably has an enlarged basal ganglia. I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if all of us didn't. And there's goods and bads, I think, that come with neurodivergency, right? It's people understanding and all of that. But I think that Gary, I love his work so much that he's doing in neurology because it's the closest that we can get on what we were saying, me going to a crop circle. It's the closest that we can get to the phenomena through science and through understanding our brain and consciousness. So that's why I connect those two together, because I do feel that there's something there. And I have seen an example of neurodivergency or that type of non-neurotypical thinking, I should say, be connected to that brought people together.
It's funny, isn't it? I'll share something with you now, right? I recently went to a chiropractor, and I had, she was a lovely lady, and we got on really well straight away, and we sort of had this chemistry together in terms of not relationship, intimate chemistry, but just on the same vibe, on the same wavelength. Yeah. And then there was a coincidence. About 2 months later, I was having dinner with my daughter, and I said to my daughter I'd visited a chiropractor, and she said, "Oh, who was it?" And I told her, and she went, "I was at an art class with her last year. They'd actually met." So when the next time I went for the appointment with the chiropractor, I said, "Oh, what do you think about coincidences?" Right, and then I brought up that she'd met my daughter, and she went, "Oh, that's giving me goosebumps. That's really strange that she got to know me and then found out that she really knew my daughter really well." So then my daughter came for an appointment just after me, and then subsequent to that, we had a meal together. And this lady said, "Oh, I was surprised when I mentioned to your daughter that she didn't know that you were ADHD." Me, ADHD, right? And so I've never considered myself to be ADHD at all, because I thought I've got, when I focus on something, it's spooky how I can, I don't have an attention deficit.
Right
exactly, right? It's like laser scope. So I've never considered. So then I thought I'd look it up. So I looked it up. What are the traits of someone with ADHD, right? Impulsive, can't be managed, don't like being told what to do, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, shit, this is me, right? But I don't like labels. I don't like... So when I spoke to her again, I said, it's interesting. You've brought something to my attention about myself, after all these years of living on the planet, that actually resonates in some ways, and I never thought it would have. But I don't like labels, because I think that we give labels to how we respond as individuals to the culture. And the culture's not normal, is it? What the life that we live is imposed on us. It's largely to do with economics. It's largely the rat race that we're involved in affects us in different ways, and therefore the traits that we have dictate our behaviour. And then the people go, "Oh, that's ADHD, or that's this, or that's that," right?
Okay.
And so I saw this other clip the other day. CIA spy, ex-CIA spy, debunks ADHD, and he says. So I watched it, and he said ADHD, if it wasn't for people with ADHD, they wouldn't make connections where other people just don't see them, right? And so I'm coming back in a roundabout way to echoing what you've just said, really, which is that there's this superpower to it. It's not to be looked at as a negative thing. But what I find interesting, Chrissy, and this is what I want to ask you, is where do you see this going with great people like Gary looking at this and saying, okay, there's a correlation between these experiences with aliens, abductions, UFOs, blah, 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 and the structure of our brains as individuals, as people, which makes us see the world differently. Where do you think that's going to go?
I think we probably have a better idea. Hopefully we'll have a better idea of what where consciousness comes from, or what is it to some degree. I think that's, we're on the road to that. To pivot to that too, we look at things like Elon Musk and the Neuralink.
Yeah.
What the hell? We would put that on the basic ganglia. I don't know, what's going to happen there?
That scares the hell out of me.
Oh yeah. And uploading memories and all of those things that are going to happen in the future potentially. Right. So, it's scary, but there's also there are positives to it. There are episodes of Black Mirror that are similar to this, but right. And so I think that there might be some kind of findings in when we become transhuman, there might be some understanding, and maybe this is just a thought of not to be, what does it mean to be human when you are transhuman, but maybe we'll have a better understanding with that technology of how those areas of the brain work and why do they function like that. Will that connection between consciousness or whatever that atmosphere is, or wherever it's staying in, or realm it's in, will we ever get a full understanding of that? I don't know. I do feel that right now they're compartmentalized for us. And we have this thing where we're okay, we understand the physical, we understand the 3D, we know what this is, but we don't understand what it means to us in space and time and other dimensions. And I think we're learning all of that. And once we learn that, then we'll have a better understanding of, we learn about more dimensions and what does that look like, and they start to be unraveled. Then we're hold on, maybe this is the step towards consciousness and what this meant in physicality to us. And we've been doing this wrong the whole time. So I think that's where we're going. I don't think it's our generation. I think it's the younger generations. I think it's my nephew and younger that will get to experience that and now finally have the ability to research it and play in those fields. Our generations have never, until now, have always been laughed at and ridiculed in that type of science. And now it's wanting to have it. Kids and people are excited for, we're going to get more women and men in STEM that are going to find out these amazing things because neurodiversity is being welcomed and understood more. Cultural definitions and defining of who we are and how do we relate to each other is hopefully getting better in some countries. But, that opens paths to better understanding and better knowledge and then application, I feel. So I don't know. I wish I had an answer to that.
Sure.
But,
I mean, it's such a long
road.
It is. Yeah. Just what your thoughts were really and where you think it might be going, just as you're sort of spitballing. Really.
Really.
We don't know the answers, but it's just bringing those things on the table, isn't it? And saying, okay, well, we've got this coming from Gary Nolan, and we've got this coming from psychedelics, and we've got this coming from these people's experiences, and this all does. This is what we say about crop circles. It all seems to keep pointing to consciousness, and so there seems to me, I don't know, but there seems to be some link between us getting a bigger understanding of consciousness is the direction of understanding some of this other stuff. They go together, don't they?
Yeah, I suggest people who are not reading anything about science to start. And if they're like, this is too difficult, this is too hard, it's like, just try. Like it's actually not. Those fundamentals are there for you, and it's accessible. You don't have to go and read papers. You can read articles. You can read tons of things, because the science behind what's happening in all these different areas is so fantastical, and it gives you a better understanding of all the other areas. So they're all connected in that way. And I find that even with the UFO topic, the more I learn about science and propulsion, let's say, and technology and all of these things, I'm like, oh, that makes more sense in this area. So I can better analyze it and understand it. So I think maybe we're at this cross connection at some point where science will become more mainstream than it is now, because even though it obviously is, but you don't have, the average Joe or, average woman talking about science to their friends or articles. You don't get the younger generations as much, but I think we will have this, I'm hoping we will have this cross moment where culture and society and science are like the most interesting they've ever been. Do you remember in like the 90s when even like I wasn't alive for the space race, but all of that was like on everyone's mind. I'll give you an example now, like the solar eclipse. Everybody around the world was talking about it, came together from it, experienced it. And we had one moment where this burning, gas giant is around us, and we're at awe of it, and to experience it. And we've come together, create events, hang out with people. That's the example of what science and culture and technology can do in those cross intersections, where they bring people together to have those experiences and have understanding. I think we're closer to that. And that's where I think we need to keep going more and more and more, so that people trust science, people trust, for example, people don't trust COVID, but they'll trust to wear, glasses because they think they're going to go blind, but nobody else will trust any, there's so many gray areas, obviously I understand in that analogy, but with what I'm saying is that within the understanding and the growing ability of what we know, and it's rapidly moving so fast, we need to really put those two together more than ever. And science needs to touch the humanity side more too, and say like, these are people, and have people experience these things or bring people together to do that. And we also need entertainment to switch immensely. Entertainment has to switch and move. Television programs, TV shows, it needs to switch that way, because that's when the masses will. It's always entertainment. I will say it. It's always the last thing that moves the channel, or moves the button, but it takes so long for that mechanism to change. Like it can take decades at times. So end of rant, but I just feel that that's where that lays, because more people will feel that they're connected to the topic or topics that relate to them, and in the future they'll have to live in or be part of.
I agree with you. I think this is it. It's making it's about this, I said earlier with Graham Hancock and the archaeologist. There's this reconciliation that needs to take place between this, people that have been considered woo-woo and metaphysical, and then the empirical scientists dismissing each other and fighting. This polarization in so many areas is not good for us. The only way forward is to say, okay, let's be adult, isn't it? Let's have a chat.
It's exactly. And it's okay not to know what you don't know, or to learn, or those opinions to change, or the evidence or proof to change. Like isn't that more exciting?
Right.
Yeah. Being like, well, I didn't know that, but Doug or Missy, you found something else that points to this. Like, how exciting is that? That's initially why people get into the subject, is for discovery and for knowledge. So why stop? And why let your ego get involved when you can just say like, wow, that's cool. Let's break it down together, or let me look at it differently. Yeah. Like, there is something in our mind though, as I forget what a friend of mine told me this, Christopher Plain at the Debrief. I think he wrote an article on it, but I believe that as we get older in our years, we stop being open-minded. Like a part of our brain slows down. That is accessible to being open-minded and new ideas and new learnings. And that part of our brain that wants to learn new things becomes old and it slows down. And so we just say, no, we don't want to do that. And that's part, and I don't know why our brain does that. I don't, maybe because we're not working the muscle, who knows, but it does happen physiologically with everybody, that part of the brain just decides to get older. So it's hard to come to new ideas or accept new ideas. And
It's sort of
why do we have that in us? I don't know.
There's this, I mean, that's what I find interesting topic, right? Because you've got these, it's like that's allegorically referenced in the Matrix, isn't it? You know, it's difficult to take somebody out when they've gone past a certain age because they've, you know, it's hard for them to handle. And that's about having your worldview completely turned upside down. If you've got your feet on the floor, right, thinking you're, all the worldview that you've developed from your parents and your education and so on suddenly gets taken away from you. You are the coyote that's just chased Roadrunner off the cliff, and you've just looked down and realised you've not got the ground anymore, right? And that's really scary. And I think there's, over the years that I've tried to lay out the facts or the data around the crop circles or whatever, or any other particular thing where you see a bias, or you see someone go, no, I don't want to look at that, I don't want to see that, because they're protecting something, aren't they? And I think that's, I'm not sure that's a part of the brain, physical brain, I don't know. I think that's in all of us, to sort of like, we've built up so much stuff after so many years that deconstructing all of that is a massive task. Turn it all upside down.
I think so too. You're right. It could be part of the brain, like just a process of getting older. And the other part is, not wanting to change your ideology because you're scared, and the fear that holds it back. You know, there are two things I was thinking. I was like, well, maybe we have to teach children to grow up to be more open-minded, which I do believe, but then you also have to think on the other end. Well, you can't be too open-minded that you believe everything, so well, that's scary too.
We go about things like, I was watching a podcast a while ago where they talked about, remember we went through that whole thing where you said to kids, there is no losing. You're all winners, right? Everything you do is fantastic, so that we can build up their self-esteem. And then when they go out in the world, they're going to be go-getters, right? Until they realize they're wrong about something, and then the whole world collapses and it doesn't do them any good. They found out they were wrong after they did all these things, right? Because you've got to get real.
Yeah.
So I think there's an element of that where you've got the critical thinking, I think it comes down to, maybe with the education, how you critically analyze stuff and say, look, there are no right answers, rather than coming from a place where teachers go, look, we've got the answers, we just need to tell you them, you need to get them in a test, and then you move on, right? I think coming back from that with a different form of education is part of the way forward, to say, look, we don't know all the answers, and actually we don't know a lot about a lot of stuff, and it all changes up on us every now and again, but what we do know is this, and we've got some ideas in this direction, and maybe we could have a look over there. And
and look for facts. Opinions are not facts.
They're
right?
not.
And I think that's a big part for anyone to know. Just because someone tells you something and it's their opinion doesn't make it a fact. And I think we have a lot of those challenges politically, socially, culturally, where we're stuck within our own subculture groups, where, Jody's telling Stephanie a story, and then she's like, oh my gosh, that's just the way it is. And then it's, then everybody thinks that. And all you're hearing and learning from is your subgroup. And that's what you're sharing information. So it is extremely important about who you surround yourself with. Like, it's true. Anyone in your circle will be when you projectingly look out, is how your world is being lived.
Absolutely.
Because they're influencing it daily. And I think about that all the time as I get older, about the people I keep around me, because I'm like, I don't want people telling me yes all the time, because that's just not, that's not progressive for me. I want people to push back on my ideals, but I want them to push back on my ideals as my friends, because they love and care for me and want the best for me and have a different opinion and can understand how to communicate that with each other, so that we can digest information that might be hard, or we don't agree with it, but we can discuss these things without getting like overly emotional. Or someone can bring up something and say, I don't think this is right, or this is what happened to me, or you upset me, or whatever it may be, but doing it in a way that they understand how I operate and how they operate, and doing it for the best reasons for that person. And that can be through knowledge, things we bring in, how we debate topics.
That's it, isn't it?
And yes. And I've noticed that progression over my life immensely, especially with women, where, the evolvement of relationships. I've left some relationships as female friends and then built a whole new group with different women, and still have women I've known since I was like 11 years old, 6 years old, to women I've known for the past 5 to 10 years. But they've become such wonderful resources of knowledge because they're so smart in many different ways, and their experiences. And I love them when we know how to communicate with each other. And that to me is just, I think is unbelievable. And I wish that for lots of people. And obviously you work on it, but it's a solid group that keeps me solid, and understands where my perspective is and knows that I'm a good person and they're a good person. Right. Because I think a lot of people question if they're good people too, to be honest.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I've heard that I hear it more from men than I hear from women, which I find really interesting, and it breaks my heart. Because they're like, am I a good person? I don't know if I'm a good person. And I'm like, well, what is a good person?
Right.
And hearing that, and that's a mechanism of society telling men that the patriarchy, there's so much crap out of it. But I think when you resonate as yourself or define and cultivate and curate your space around you of men and women that have try to have a better understanding of self and what that means to others and how to communicate with others, I think those feelings and those understandings start to dissipate. And then I think that's when you either go through healing or other things. This became a therapy conversation.
No, see, I was just going to say now, we're coming to the end of this now, right? And this is it, isn't it? This is why I said from the beginning, phenomena B, the effect it has on us to be involved in these subjects is self-discovery. It's temet nosce. It's know yourself. You get to know yourself when Andy Thomas, who's one of my peers in the crop circles, I'm not the big cheese in the crop circles. There are some people who are bigger than me, right? Tall trees. Andy Thomas is one of them. He said this in an interview. He said, it's a strange thing, but the deeper you dive into the crop circle phenomenon, the deeper you dive into your own soul.
So true.
And this is it, isn't it? This is what we're talking about. Okay, you're talking about people having better relationships with each other in order to solve the mysteries that we're talking about. The obstacle that's stopping us are the fixed opinions, the people who will argue because of what they believe rather than what they will examine with the data from the other side. And when that changes, I think everything's going to change.
I agree with you. 100%. People always say, I've heard so many people say to me, well, the data, we need the data, the data matters. And I'm like, I agree. The data is extremely important. That's how we, understand this and can use it as evidence and to create more correlations and explain things. But this is a human experience.
Exactly.
And if those people think that the data is more important than the human experience, it's not saying that they aren't, but I think that they need to hold it in just the same way.
Exactly.
Yeah, because it is a self-reflection. And I won't say this because I don't want to call him out on this, but I was I'm going to drop the name, but it was a very notable name. And I was with him recently and he's like a rapper, and I was in California, and I literally had a couple minutes. I was introduced with him, and I literally had a conversation about existentialism with him, and it was unbelievable. And I was like, I can't believe I'm even having this conversation with this person. He doesn't believe that there's any phenomena going on. And I thought, I stopped, and I was like, I'm like, well, what does that mean to you? And I literally asked him, like, why? And for him, it was just like, I create my own reality. It was really interesting that his counterpart and his best friend really does believe this, and he doesn't, and they have these discussions. But I find it interesting because what you just said, I'm like, what is it that you don't want to think about these things, or you don't want to ponder about this? What is stopping you to do that? And for him, it was almost like, I make my reality, which I respect because he's done much more than I have in the world. And I control that, and nobody else does. And does it really matter if this exists? What does it change in the world? Does it change? It doesn't change how I operate. And I get that. I'm like, that's fair. That's someone who's strong in their convictions and who they are. But it makes me wonder too, but why not? Like, you don't have to change how you operate in your existential. You have to go through an existential crisis, but why not? Like, there's a dead no, it's not happening. And I still have a hard time. I'm still pondering that where I'm like, why? Like, for me, it's important. I want to know. And for some people, they just don't. But I feel that this is something that is real and it's human to us. So why not care?
It's like, again, there's another quote from The Matrix, isn't there? You know, Morpheus says to Neo, do you believe in fate? And he says, no. And he said, why not? And he said, because I don't like to believe I'm not in control of my own life. And Morpheus says, I know exactly what you mean. But there is this other side. And that other side is like when I was at university, the landlord was a biochemist who postdoced in Berkeley, and then came back to Cardiff and got a first in psychology in 2 years, and then finished his career lecturing in psychology, and was writing a book on the biological basis of consciousness, right? And he handpicked the people who lived in this 3-story house that, you know, he lived in he built a house in the garden with his fantastic library and his office, and he was just an amazing guy. And he would handpick the people that lived in the house, a philosopher and a chemist and me, right, language and communication, and he would read these peer reviews articles and post them under the door. You'd get this photocopy, and you'd know he'd be calling around for a cup of tea and a chat later, right? This man did not do woo-woo, Chrissy. He did not do psychic. He was life is an accident, DNA is a mutation, we're just patch on patch on patch, random accident, okay? And I had big problems with this, obviously, at first, because I thought, no, there's more to it. But it did me so much good to love this man and respect him and respect where he was coming from, and have controlled, unemotional, non-biased conversations where he would go, okay, where did you get that information from? Show me the data, or back it up with some evidence. Or it really did me so much good. So I don't know who it was you were just talking about, but their relationship where they have opposite views, that must be very healthy, really. It must be challenging, but...
Yeah, and it is. And they have a really wonderful friendship, and they debate this topic all the time. And I love that. And I love that I even just got interjected into it for a second to even have a conversation about existentialism.
Wow.
You know, like, yeah, you're like, wow. And that's cool. But for him, it was just like, well, you're a believer and I'm not. And that's kind of what I got at the end. Maybe one day when I get back to California, I'll have a longer conversation with him to be like, why? And get to ask him that question. This is a human experience. Why do you believe in manifestation, and you believe in all of these things, and you control and manifest your own world. If manifestation is real, then why isn't the other ability for all these other things to be real? Because manifestation we can't prove.
Nope.
You know, we can't prove that what we think turns into, and we can kind of, but it's not something we can't evaluate, right? Like, it's not like a hard science.
Exactly.
Right. So that, and it's like, well, what makes you think that, but not the other? And that's the other conversations I would like to dive in, because that's the learning about what that person believes and who they are too, which is even more interesting, of what makes them tick, why. And I've had these conversations too. I have to jump off in a couple minutes. Sure. I just realized that I've had this conversation with someone in an airport too. It was a man. I was sitting in line at customer service at American Airlines because my flight was being bopped around different places, and I was trying to like get home quicker. And so I usually just talk to random people all the time. I love it. And I love spending a lot of time in the States because it's so different than Canada at times, and how we work in the world as societies. And we're North Americans. We're similar that way. So he says hi, and I say hi, and we start talking. And he is a man from he's a part of a biker gang, but notes it as a biker club.
Okay.
And so we get into like these conversations, and then we talk about, he's like, I live in the Bible Belt area. And so he's like, what do you do? So I told him I podcast about science and technology, and I write about it, and UFOs. And he's like, whoa, like that goes against my religious beliefs. So I had a conversation with him, and I said, I said, I understand that. I respect that. I said, but that understanding or looking into UFOs, or, the belief, even though it's not a belief, but the being curious about UFOs, you can do that with your religion. And he's like, no, I can't. My religion tells me I can. And I said, well, depending on your religion, but the Vatican says that it's okay. They have the head astrologer, I was going to say astronomy. Professor that is there, and that, talks about the world in conjunction with obviously religion. And so I said, yeah, the Vatican has come forward saying that you can believe, or you can, be curious about aliens and about extraterrestrial life. And he has stopped and just looked at me and was like, what? And I said, well, yeah. I said, the the concept of UFO doesn't mean that it negates religion. It doesn't say that. There's nowhere in any UFO, unless you're picking certain types of mythology or UFOology, then ufology, then yes, maybe you'll say like stuff from, oh my gosh, what's it called? The Sumerians, right?
Yeah.
You might cherry pick that kind of part of, let's say, their religion, but there was multiple religions back then. But anyway, you might pick one of those from that topic. But all in all, the topic of ufology doesn't tell you, it asks questions about religion, but it doesn't say that you cannot believe in religion and religion doesn't exist. They can coexist at the same time. And when I said that to him, he was like, and he's like, I'm going to follow your podcast. And I was like, that's great. But I laughed because I was like, this is a man that in our world, I am, in his world and my world probably never have collided if we were not in this airport. We don't grow up from the same backgrounds. We don't have similar experiences per se. We don't believe in the same things really, but we could talk to each other and have a conversation that was respectful to each other and also interesting. Because I heard his world, for a good 40, I was in that line for like an hour and a half. For a good half an hour, he was telling me about how he grew up in his life. So taking the time to listen, and then, he did the same thing for me. And I think that was like that moment. And when he left, I was like, wow, I learned so much about that area of the world that I don't spend time in through his lens. But also he left thinking, oh, maybe I should look at this. And I was like, that's cool. I was like, that's cool. And that's what that's about.
And that's why the buzzword, the slogan of my podcast, against the grain, obviously, because we're talking about topics that go against grain, and there's the double entendre with the crop circles, but also where curiosity leads the way. Because that's it, isn't it? You were curious about him as a human being. He was curious about you. It sounds like you gave him permission, vicariously from the Vatican, to be interested in something he was probably already interested in, but thought he wasn't allowed to go there.
Yeah. And I think that's, I could see a light bulb go like, oh, like
I'm allowed to be interested.
Yeah. I'm allowed, like, I can do this, or I can look into it and like, oh, that's interesting. Or I've never thought of that. And I was like, oh, I've seen that in different places, but I've never, because I live in Canada and I've obviously traveled around the world, thankfully, I'm very grateful for that. But I've never sat with specific people within a region of like, the parts of the States in the South that might have totally different ideology than I do. But we can still get along and hang out, and he will still go away feeling certain ways of his topics, and I will too. But at least, he followed my podcast. He followed me on Instagram, and he was like, if I message you, would you say hi? I said 100% I would. I said, because that's what that's about. I just think that I don't know. I enjoy in this topic from podcasting and just in real life, having like those conversations with people, because if I could do that every day, I would, because that's what makes me tick. And I find it so fascinating. Like, I love to learn. And I know you do too, Gary.
I do.
Like, I just love it. It's just, every day. And that's why we're in this.
Exactly.
I think is a big part of it. You just get to learn all the time.
And it's a great way to I'll let you go now because you've given me so much of your time, and I'm so grateful. But I'm going to let you go on such a positive note, because really all of this subject, which people think we're out to just prove that these lights in the sky are little green men, most of what we've talked about is what it is to be human. And this is what this subject does, isn't it? And you've just ended it with that beautiful story where you've recognized the humanity in somebody, he's recognized it in you, and you've become friends and contacts. And that's really what it's all about, isn't it?
And selfishly, I think that's, as much as I think UFOs are so interesting, I think I selfishly love this part of the topic, because again, back to bookending it, sitting with all those people at a table from walks of life and being like, wow, like you guys are some amazing people. And like, and we get to talk about something that is so fantastical, and everybody has something to contribute, and everyone just listens. And it doesn't happen like that all the time, but I see that more than the other. And that's why I think I love it so much. And there's so many stories in this space,
so
like
stories.
never ending. And that's why, like, you see like Dan Aykroyd on like Joe Rogan.
Yeah.
He knows, like, he loves them. And like, and I think that's the big part, because it's human. It's just what it is. And as we get older and all of these shows and podcasts will go on and people will watch all this stuff later on, I think that's going to be interesting.
Yes.
When it's like 30, 40, 50 years from now, and people are like, we know so much more. And now we have this plethora of online like data from like civilians talking about this. Like, God, I wish we had that to watch while I was growing up. You know, independent content is like where it's at.
It's where it's at for sure.
Yeah.
Chrissy, thanks so much for your time. This has been fantastic. Will you do it again with it? You come on again?
Oh, 100%, Gary. And then I'll come down to England and visit too.
That would be fantastic. I'll take you to the crop circles again. 10 years
I
later.
would love
10 years later. I've got a feeling this season's going to be big. Fingers crossed.
Oh, really?
Oh, wow. You never know, but
that's okay. Well, yes, 100%. I would love that. So it was so good to see you as always.
You too. Thanks so much.
Thank you.